If you're walking on eggshells in your relationship, most people will tell you that's just what relationships look like. That love is hard, that it takes constant work and compromise. That's not entirely wrong, but what nobody tells you is that half the time, the difficulty isn't the relationship, it's her. And the other half is the fact that you chose her. Now, in this video, I'm going to break down the 6 signs you're with an emotionally immature woman. And more importantly, why you ended up there in the first place. The first sign we're going to jump into is accountability avoidance. Now, you have to pay attention to how a woman talks about her past. Her relationship didn't work out, but the men were never ready. Things fell apart at work, but her coworkers were threatened by her. Every story has the same structure. The circumstances change, but her attitude remains the same. That pattern follows her into your relationship. When she snaps at you, it's stress. When she goes cold, you must have triggered her. When something goes wrong, the thread always leads back to you. There's no self reflection, no ownership, just a consistent inability to locate herself as a contributor to her own problems. And because you're trying to be reasonable, you get patient, you get understanding, and you start apologizing more and pushing back less. You become more careful with your words and more measured with your reactions. You're mostly focused on managing her perception of you. And this all happens gradually, one concession at a time. That's when you realize you've been living in a courtroom where she is the judge, the jury, and the prosecutor simultaneously. And every argument you have is like a trial, literally. Every mistake you make is evidence. And the verdict, no matter how the case unfolds, was decided before you even opened your mouth. But here's what makes it a trap. You keep showing up to defend yourself in very good faith. That's reasonable. Because you believe that if you just explain yourself clearly enough, the verdict will change. But it actually won't. She's just not interested in the truth of what actually happened. She's interested in the conclusion she's actually has reached. And every time you stand in that courtroom and actually plead your case, you're not clearing your name. You're just validating the charges against you. Now, before we go further, you need to understand something. 90% of the time, you're not out of luck. You're simply predictable. The women you attract aren't just arbitrary. They reflect whether you've actually defined who you are and what you stand for, or whether you're still figuring that out as you go. A man with clear values and genuine standards projects a very specific signal, and that signal filters out. It draws women who either match it or respect it, and repels women who don't. And most men just skip that work entirely. So their signal is fundamentally weak. And a weak signal doesn't attract the wrong woman because of some curse. It attracts her because you left the door open. And whoever walked through it felt like it was just destined to be. The second reason is much simpler. You have no vetting process. You meet a woman, you feel the gravity of attraction, and ride the momentum forward. You don't pause to evaluate her character, her patterns, her history, or whether her values align with yours. You just hope it works out. And hope is not a vetting process. So let's continue. Now, the truth is, avoiding accountability is just a symptom. The deeper cause is actually psychological, and that's what we speak about here. It's the psychology, and it manifests in far uglier ways than just running from responsibility. One of those being emotional instability as a control mechanism. This takes us to the second sign. And I want to start with something that sounds harsh, but it's actually worth sitting with. Real pain doesn't need an audience. Think about the last time you were profoundly hurt, for example. You weren't monitoring the room. You weren't tracking how the person across from you was reacting. You were just overwhelmed by it because real pain is actually self contained. It doesn't require your reaction to sustain itself. Now, think about how her emotional escalations evolve. The tears arrive just at the moment where the argument starts slipping away from her. The silence lands when she knows you can't tolerate it. And emotional outbursts peak right at the moment where you'd normally put your foot down. The timing is never arbitrary, it's always calculated. That's not accidental. The outburst is actually, maybe as counterintuitive as it sounds, a means of control. And here's what you've been conditioned to do in response. You renounce whatever point you are making and redirect every ounce of your attention towards managing her emotional state. You apologize and then you backtrack. You become so invested in stopping the escalation that you forget what you are even disagreeing about. And that's not an accident either, because the outburst needs your fear to sustain itself. The tears need your surrender to dry up. You are not observing her emotion, you are fueling it. And the moment you stop reacting, you notice something very curious. The performance has nowhere to go. An immature woman confuse emotional intensity with emotional depth. And they've learned, consciously or not, that intensity works, that if they turn up the volume high enough, you'll eventually surrender. You'll fold because you're a good man who takes her pain seriously. And she knows that. She's no longer at that point expressing herself. She's directing you to a certain end. And every time you follow the script, you've scripted for her another scene. But here's what you haven't realized yet. You could handle the outbursts if they were just about control. You could learn to spot the pattern, hold your ground, and stop feeding the performance. But there's a deeper truth underneath all this, one that explains why, even when she's gone, you can't quite get through to her. And that's the third sign, which is she is irreversibly self centered. Imagine you're in the middle of an argument and you're trying to make a point, you're trying to explain yourself, you're laying out your intentions clearly, calmly, and somewhere in the middle of your explanation, you make a very, very unsettling realization that she's not even listening to you. She's just waiting to tell you how it made her feel. This has a name in psychology. It's called solipsistic thinking. But you don't actually need that term. You just need to notice this pattern. It's a genuine cognitive limitation. It's an inability to step outside her own frame of reference and hold yours at the same time. Everything you do passes through a single filter. How does this make me feel? Your intentions don't enter the equation here. Your motivations don't register. What you meant, why you did it, what was actually going on for you. None of it survives contact with that mirror because a mirror doesn't interpret, it only reflects. And what gets reflected back is never you or your intentions, it's her reaction and her feelings towards you. So you start to notice a pattern. When you pull back to create space, she experiences it as rejection. When you're quiet because you're processing, she experiences it as punishment. Your internal world is completely invisible to her. So you over explain, add more context, and find better words. You try to close the gap between what you meant on the one hand and what she received on another. But here's what you haven't realized yet, the gap isn't a communication problem. That's what everyone's telling you, that everything is a communication problem. But you can't talk your way into someone else's frame of reference if they don't have the capacity to hold it. That's the distinction most men miss. There's a difference between a woman who understands you and chooses not to engage with it, and a woman who cannot compute a perspective that doesn't originate from her own experience. One is selfishness, but the other is actually limitation, and you cannot reason your way past a limitation. So here's what changes. You stop over explaining, you stop trying to close the gap, you say what you mean once, clearly, and then you let the silence do the work. If she can't meet you there, that's not a communication failure, that's data. And here's where it gets worse. A woman who can't step outside her frame of reference can't build an inner sense of self because identity requires the ability to see yourself from different angles, not just how you feel, but how you show up and what you value, independent of others. She can't do any of that, so her sense of self gets built externally, as you see with most women on social media, dating apps, and a host of other things. Which brings us to the fourth sign. The fourth sign is validation seeking disguised as confidence. Now, real confidence has an inner power source. It runs on a woman's own sense of identity, her values, her sense of knowledge, her relationship with who she is when nobody's watching. That kind of confidence doesn't fluctuate based on external feedback. It holds steady whether the room responds or doesn't. But what you mistook for confidence was something else entirely. It was a performance that runs on external current, like male attention, social approval, likes, validation from you. endless attention. The signal she was projecting was a sophisticated feedback loop that required constant input to keep the lights on. And he happened to be one of those inputs. So when you don't react to a photo, for example, in the way that she expects you to, or you're genuinely busy so your attention dips for a few days, her confidence just plummets. And what follows is either a spiral, like withdrawal, emotional collapse, and sudden insecurity, or an aggressive pursuit of the input that she's lost, like manufactured drama and behavior that is designed to provoke you. Now, the woman who seemed like she needed nothing from anyone now suddenly needs everything from you. It's quite ironic, right? Right now, and with urgency. A woman running on external validation has outsourced her entire sense of self to the room around her. And that makes her fundamentally unpredictable because you cannot control the inputs she needs to stay regulated. And when those inputs fluctuate, as they always will, you can't get a peaceful woman working through discomfort. You get total darkness and a woman frantically searching for that switch. The confidence was always borrowed, and borrowed confidence always comes with a bill. Now, here's the thing, you can spot all four of these patterns early, but most men don't because they're all hidden during the easy phase, the first 6 months. And that's where the fifth sign comes in. It's not just another pattern, it's the actual trigger, the moment that forces every other sign to the surface. The fifth sign is resistance to earned difficulty. The early stages of a relationship, the excitement, the novelty, the version of you she'd constructed in her head before reality actually complicated it. That's where she thrives. That's where it's easy, where the emotional demand is low and the reward is extremely high. That's where she can really touch the bottom and feel safe. But relationships don't, stay in shallow waters. They can't. At some point, the ground drops away and you're basically both swimming in something deeper, like real vulnerability, hard conversations, sustained effort, compromise that actually costs something. That's the sign of a relationship that actually has actual stakes. And that's exactly where she disappears. So, what's the pattern? The moment a genuine difficulty surfaces, not a crisis, just the ordinary friction of two people building something together. Something shifts in her. She doesn't engage with the difficulty directly, she refrains it. And suddenly the relationship has problems she's never mentioned to you before. Suddenly you have qualities she's only just noticed. Suddenly she needs space or time or a conversation that feels less like resolution and more like the construction of an exit strategy to get away from you. She's building a case against you because staying in deep water requires something she hasn't developed yet, which is the capacity to tolerate discomfort without immediately moving to escape it, to sit with the weight of something hard and choose it anyway, to offer commitment without condition. That's a maturity problem. And here's what you must understand, shallow relationships are easy because they never ask anything of either person. They run on novelty and the mutual projection of who you hope the other person is. And for a woman who hasn't done the internal work, that's the only version of a relationship she knows how to sustain. This is the moment where all five signs actually converge. She avoids accountability for why it's hard. She uses emotional instability to control the exit. She can't see your perspective, only her discomfort. She needs external validation to feel stable, and you're no longer providing enough. And she cannot tolerate the earned difficulty that would deepen the relationship. That's not a reflection of what you've built, it's a reflection of how far she was ever willing to go in the first place. Remember what I said in the beginning, half the time, the difficulty isn't the relationship, it's her. And as controversial as that sounds, it still falls on you because the other half is entirely your fault. It's you who made the decision. Now you know actually how to see them clearly. Not after 2 years of walking on eggshells, but early on, before hope turns into a sunken cost. And more importantly, you know when to stop trying to teach someone to swim because some women are only built for a certain depth, and no amount of patience, effort, or emotional depth on your part can change that. So here's the part most men skip though, asking why you stayed as long as you did, why you tolerated the courtroom, why you kept feeding the performance, why you didn't leave when the shallow water never got deeper. That's not a question about her. That's a question about the part of you that taught you could fix it. And until you answer that, the next woman would just be a different version of the same pattern. So think about it. Have you repeated this pattern before in your own life? I'll be curious to hear your thoughts. Anyways, my friends, I'm going to close off this episode here. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below. And as always, if you want to work with me directly, you can book a connection call with me by clicking the first link in my bio. And I'll hope to speak to you soon. Take care.